Hey guys, welcome back. It is your favorite Gimp with a Limp, and I'm here with a video type that I haven't done in a while, a top 5. I know I've got it in my top 10 category, but generally I do top 5s. So, this is going to be the top 5 Hex Counter Games. Now, this is my top 5, alright? So, my opinions, and it can only be the games that I've actually played. There are others that look really good. There's one I've got getting ready to be put on the table here very soon that might be added to the list. We'll have to see how well it plays out. But of the multitude of war games that I've played, we're going to do a top Hex Encounter war games, which Hex Encounter are my favorite type of war games. I just think it's the most traditional type of war game. It's what got me into wargaming in the first place. So we're going to jump right into it here. Before we start, I do need to make sure to mention that they're not in any specific order. So the order that you see them on this video isn't like 5 to 1 or 1 to 5 or anything like that. These are just my top favorites because they all offer something a little bit different in the Hex Encounter genre. So first up, I put this one first because anyone who's watched any of my videos or any of our Whiskey Charlies knows this one was going to be on the list. Of course, it is Thunder in the East, which has been bought by GMT, so it's a GMT game now. Wasn't when it was released, but it is now. And they are working on the next in the series, which I keep talking about, so you guys make sure and stay tuned for that. And I'm not going to spend an overabundance on this game because I have talked about it a lot, and you guys know why I like this game. It's all about the streamlined play for the game of its size. I'll have a video on in the background of one of my playthrough sessions. But the big thing with it is it's one of those games that covers up a massive amount of your table. There's a lot of counters. There's a lot of counters coming on the board, off the board, switching things around. You have to deal with air forces. You have to deal with headquarters, supply lines, communication lines. So many different aspects, all the different types of things that you have to worry about when it comes to a war game. And they really did a good job of streamlining this game so it could be played easily. Now, when I talk about streamlining, I don't mean that it's a quick to play game per se. It's going to take you a while to play it, especially if you play through the whole thing kind of like as a campaign type game. That'll take you forever. So I don't mean quick. I just mean that you can easily follow the sequence of play as an example. Go right down the list. It's color coded, which I've always liked that they did that with this game. That way, if you're not using things like optional rules or you're not playing campaign rules, you don't even have to look at those. You know, when you see rules that are in blue, you know it has to do with your air forces. Things like that. It made it to where it was very easy to get the game to the table and actually start playing it. Now, it is a deep game. I consider this a smaller monster type game because it is 4 big maps spread across your table. There's multitude of units. It, really does cover your table. It's a big game. But for a game of its size, your ability to play it is really, really streamlined. One of the big things that I like that you'll be able to see in the video in the background is the yellow dice. You're not rolling these yellow dice. They are placed to help show you where headquarters units are located and give you an idea of what the supply radius is. Because that's a big thing in this game, is how far out your supplies extend from your headquarters units, because that can change depending on choices that you make. So looking at it, you can see it'll say an 8 or a 6 or 4, whatever number that's on there, but you know by looking at that die that stands out very clearly on the table how far your logistics lines send out your supplies, and you can easily count out from that die. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Every unit within this radius is covered. But like I said, that doesn't mean that the game is simplistic or beer and pretzels. It's far from it. It's going to take you a while to play through the turns. You have to get fairly in depth, especially the combat on this, because there's a multitude of units that can attack into a single hex, and then you have to figure out your combat odds, whether or not you're attributing any aircraft to it, whether your opponent's bringing any aircraft to it. Then you have to take and handle the air conflict, right? So air to air, and then if you have surviving air units, then they can contribute to the air to ground attack and a support type function, which can give you modifiers on the combat results table, you know, positive, negative, just depending on how you roll. Has special dice for that as well, which I think helped it, because you can look at the die. You know, sometimes a special custom die can make things a little more complex, but this one, it really did kind of simplify it. It was just little lightning bolts that are on your aircraft counters, and those will tell you how many dice and how strong the aircraft are, you know, what they're adding into that into their attack roll. And other little symbols let you know whether the aircraft's weak or strong. Really, they did a just excellent job trying to make this game easy to play for its size without sacrificing the complexity that you look for in a game of this size. Even things like lines on the maps pre-printed showing you where the combat lines, where the front line is for each of the different scenarios. So it made it a whole lot easier when you're first laying out your scenario to know exactly where the units are going to go, because the lines are already printed right there on the map. You know, yellow for one, or blue or green, I forget all the exact colors, but they're marked for all the different scenarios. Really, really, really good job here. Alright, so next up on the list is going to be another one that I've talked about previously. So again, I'm not going to go horribly in depth on this one. This is World at War 85, which is a what-if game based on a potential World War III type scenario. And it's a step up from like the tactical level. All right, so you know, tactical, you have man-to-man, squad, individual vehicles being represented. Here you're looking at more company level type combat. So counters represent a handful of vehicles or a company of units, that type of scale in the game. So just a step up from what you think of in like lock and load tactical. So obviously this has the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact being portrayed against the NATO forces with America, Britain, Western Germany. I had to think about it for a sec. So Western Germany, that type, right? So big scale, missiles, helicopters, jets, all that cool stuff going on with it. Now, the big thing for this game, it's got a lot going for it. It plays well. I love the drawing of the cards for activating your units during the turn, because it's not an I go, you go system. It gives it that random factor that is crucially needed if you're going to play a game solitaire. So you can play it solitaire. There is a solitaire deck that you can use with the game, which does work well. It is generic, which is to be expected because it's designed to be used with multiple different modules, so they can't make it very specific, but it's good enough to serve its purpose, absolutely. Key thing, though, is that drawing, that chit draw but card draw mechanic for activating the units. You don't even know if your unit is going to get activated, so it'll be a formation that includes, you know, a handful of different units when you draw that card, but there's no guarantee that card is going to get drawn every single turn. It might not be drawn. Now, the game is designed in such a way, though, that if it's not drawn on a specific turn, it will guarantee to be drawn on the next turn. So your units can never not be activated turn after turn after turn. But it does provide that lovely randomization factor, the fact that you don't know. You could play the same scenario, exact same setup, exact same units, everything set up the exact same way, but thanks to that random factor, the battle will play out completely different because units will activate in different orders. It can't be static with that I go, you go. Now, another good benefit with this game is it really can be played how you want to play it. You can play a small scenario up to a scenario that is so big you can't even fit it on your table. You have to put it on the floor or up on the wall or something. You really can go as large or as small as you want to. One of the things that really struck me about this game the first time I saw it at the WBCs, they had a few different maps laid out, and they were playing the same scenario over a handful of days, letting people see the game and kind of understand how it was played. And just to watch that over the few days as they kept playing the same game, and the units were pushing forward, and they were losing tanks, and they were losing objective markers, and they were taking cities, and things were getting blown up, and wreck markers were everywhere. It was just awesome to watch the battlefield change. By the end of it, I'm looking at it, and there's flame markers and wreck markers and just a handful of units left on each side after they've just been duking it out and having helicopters hiding behind trees and popping up to fire missiles off at each other back and forth. Really, really just awesome looking at it all splayed out after you got done with just this big powerhouse slugging match where they're just duking it out as hard as they can go. And also, you don't even have to play it as a Hex Encounter game. Now, I know I have it here because it's a Hex Encounter game, but they do include cards with it that you could adjust to play different scale miniature type game using the rules, using the system if you wanted to. And that's an extra step that most people don't take when it comes to their games, giving you the ability to know that, like, okay, well, the range is 6, in hexes, but it'll be 15 inches or 15 centimeters, whatever the scale you're playing as, if you've got minis. And it's got a different assortment of miniatures specs on these cards. I really thought that was neat that they included that to give people more freedom on how they want to play the game. Do they want to play it as it was designed, just Hex Encounter right there on the board where it still looks good, still plays great? Or do you want to turn it into a big-ass miniatures game? Maybe you've got war terrain already set up on your table for other games. Maybe you play Bolt Action or something and you want to apply this rule set to it. Bam, you can. And it works really well. I think that's awesome that they did that. And a sticking factor, one thing that you'll find with a lot of these games, there's one that it doesn't apply to on this list, but for the majority of them, it's the ease of play. It does take a little bit. You have to sit down and read over the rules and get them. Now, I did do a boot camp series on this, which will help in the learning of it, but once you know the rules, pretty much player aids are all you're going to need. You don't have to keep digging into it over and over. It's fairly I don't want to say simplistic, but intuitive, that you can look at the counters and you'll get to where you grasp it. And it seems like there's a lot of information on the counters at first, but after you've played a few rounds, it really does start to stick with you. And then you just need the player aids just to remind you of maybe the steps and what numbers exactly you're looking at as you do your firing procedure or your assault procedure, whatever you're doing. And besides that, the game's just gorgeous on the table. Now, the video I'm showing right now probably doesn't do it justice, since some of this was prototype components at the time. But it really does just look gorgeous once you get all those nice big pre-rounded counters out on the table and you see all the different formations just getting ready to duke it out and throw missiles and small arms and all that good stuff at each other. It just looks excellent when it's all spread out, especially when you get like a big Frankfurt match going on, 8 different maps all put together to create this huge battlefield. Oh, it's excellent. Alright, so next up on the list is Conflict of Heroes, and when I say Conflict of Heroes, I am very specifically talking about the 3rd edition of Conflict of Heroes. Now, the 2nd edition I liked. All right, it was not a bad game by any means. Components were excellent, all the other good stuff. It's another tactical-based World War II type game, right? But the 3rd edition of this, when they really did a very nice overhaul of the rules, took this game to a completely different level. And the completely different level for me was for the solitaire play. Now, I'm sure it worked just as well for competitive play, but I haven't got to play this game as much competitively as I would probably like to. But for solitaire play, the 3rd edition rules are it what really, really changes the whole scope of this game. So to not get long-winded on it, before the second edition basically operated where you would activate your units, whether it was tanks or trucks or infantry or whatever those type of units were, you would activate them, and they would have a set number of points that they would get to spend. Whether it was, I think it was 7 points for each unit, and it might cost them 1 point per each hex they move in, and then added points if they were moving into difficult terrain. But things like performing a fire attack might cost 3 or 4 action points, and you would spend up to that 7, and then the unit was spent for the turn, and it would go back and forth like that, where you would spend your unit, you'd spend as many points. Now, if you didn't spend them all, then they were kind of wasted, and you would go back and forth. There were a few cards, the commander cards, that were like blue, that gave you the ability to activate and still use units that were already spent, but that was kind of a rare thing. You didn't have that many of those cards, but it made the game more static. The third edition changed that and introduced a weighted die to the game. And the die was a 10-sided die, but it only went up to 7. It had like a couple of 1s, a 2, a couple of 3s, something like that on there, right? So not your standard D10 type dice. And the way this die was designed was when you activated that unit, right? And say it spent 1 point or 2 points, whatever it was, doing its action. Well, now you would roll the die to see whether or not the unit became spent, which means no matter how costly that action was, there's a chance that the unit didn't become spent, which means you could activate it again its next turn. Now, there was a stress rule in the game that would add a point cost, a single point to them when they would activate turn after turn after turn, to kind of penalize you if you continue to activate the same unit over and over. They're becoming fatigued, if you will. But this added that randomness factor that I always stress is needed so badly for a solitaire game. So now you no longer knew if a unit was going to become spent. But on top of that, even simple actions like spending that single point to just move a tank up the road 1 hex, because you only do one thing in this game, right? In this edition of it, you'll do your one action and then it goes to your opponent. But each time you're rolling that die or drawing the card, if you want to go that route for the AI and yourself, there's multiple ways you can handle it, but let's just say the die. You roll that die, there's still that chance that that unit's going to become spent, even off the smallest of point expenditures. So now you don't know. Any action you take could spend the unit. So more than likely, a single point isn't going to cause the unit to become spent, but it could. And that could change your entire game plan, because maybe you were planning on continuing to push that tank on up, the road, get it to a safe spot or a T-junction or somewhere like that, and now you can't. Now it's become spent. Now you have a handful of command points that you could potentially spend to move the unit that way. How are you going to handle this? Now your unit's spent and it's out in the open. It changed the entire scope of the game. You can see in the background of the video that I'm rolling the die as I'm activating these units and checking to see whether or not they're becoming spent. So the game already had a multitude of things in it, like dummy counters for the AI, so you didn't know whether or not a unit represented on the board was an actual enemy unit. That stuff already existed to give it that random factor, which was great. But now you don't know with the enemy if they're going to become spent, or if you're going to become spent, if your units are going to get lucky. Maybe you take that heavy shot with your tank that takes 5 or 6 points, where there's, a 1 out of 10 chance that you're not going to become spent, but maybe you get lucky and you need to have that happen to have some, condition met so you win the game, so you can push on and get a second shot and take out whatever target that you're going for as your objective. And that's actually kind of what happened to me in this game. It was a big tank game. I used their tank expansion. It had a whole bunch of different monster tanks. So I had the German monster tanks versus the Russian monster tanks. So it was like ISs versus Tigers and Ferdinands, that type of situation. And it was just the sweetest game I'd ever played. Tanks were everywhere. Wrecks were blowing up. Things were happening. Really fun game. But towards the end of it, my goal was to take out the enemy command tank. And I kept pushing, trying to find the command tank. I could not find the command tank to save my life. And then there at the very end, I finally find the command tank. And I had to push just right with a couple of different units to get one around behind it, because I did not have a unit that was strong enough to penetrate the tank from the front. So I had to get lucky and get around behind him before he was able to turn, so I could get a shot into his flank, which was still going to be hard. And if I remember right on the game, I ended up having to get lucky on a couple of dice rolls where the units didn't become spent, play a couple of cards, and have the attack go through just right. And I ended up winning it. It was like this clutch moment where everything had to line up perfectly in my battle plan to win. That's the moment you live for when you're playing these games solitaire, where you come up with this idea like, okay, I can do this if everything works out just right. I've gotten beat back on both my flanks. There's my target. I'm going to push for it. I'm going to Hail Mary this, sacrifice this tank over here to keep the commander focused in this direction so I can circle my other tank around. But it's only going to work if he doesn't become spent as he's circling around these trees, because if he does become spent, there's no way that enemy tank's not going to turn around and face me before the next turn, and I'll never be able to get him. I'll never have a shot at his rear ever again to be able to hit him in his weak side. So it all came down to that one specific moment. And that moment wouldn't have existed, I don't believe, with the second edition of these rules. But the third edition really gives you that chance. And I think it will work both ways. Solitaire players or playing heads up against someone else. I still think the way to die to it really gives you that uncertainty you need in a war game to get that thrill, to get that, oh, can I clutch it? Can I get this one die roll? Can I get this target, the objective, whatever it is? And I got to give Academy Games props for doing that. This Conflict of Heroes has been out for a while. I've known about it, had it since years ago, early on, when I first got into wargaming. And still, even after all this time has gone by, they're still tweaking it, they're still perfecting it, and they came up with a better idea after the game's been out for a while, and refreshed it and gave it this new coat, this new lease on life. That's really going above and beyond. I got to give it to Academy Games, though. They really don't put stuff out until they think it's as perfect as it can possibly be. Takes them forever to release a game, but when they release a game, it's almost perfect. It's that German engineering. They will tweak the hell out of it until it's perfect. Okay, so next up on our list is a classic. I know many of you will think fondly back on this game. I do. This one is one that I absolutely think I need to get back to the table and do again, because I filmed it early on when I had first got into wargaming. I didn't have very good cameras, I didn't have very good lighting, I didn't have very good mics. I sounded a lot more boring in my videos. I was watching over some of it. So I really need to refilm this game, and this is Unconditional Surrender by GMT Games. So this game is a World War II. A lot of these games are World War II, I think. Let's see. Damn. All 4 out of the 5 are World War II games. I'll be damned. All right. I wasn't shooting for that, but hell, World War II's covered more than anything else. Anyway, on to the specifics. This game is a World War II game set in the European theater, and it covers pretty much the entirety of the war. Not every single aspect, but the majority of the European conflict, right, for World War II. And this is set at the very high strategic level where you're looking down at the map and it's countries, right? You know, handful of hexes, and you're across the entirety of Germany or France or whatever country you're looking at. I think, was it Belgium, something like 3 hexes in this game. I think the Netherlands like 4. You know, it's that scale of game, very large scale game. And one of the benefits of this game is its ability to be played relatively easily. It's the density for this game is not overly heavy. You can tell by the video there you're not feeling swarmed with it. Right? You got just a handful of counters on each side that you have to worry about. I mean, it's more than a handful, but compared to a lot of games of this scale, it is nowhere near as complex. You don't have 30, 40 counters on each side that you're having to keep track of. You just have that small handful that are representing a large scale force of units that you have to worry about. And it makes it to where the game doesn't feel so daunting. And for me, that was a big thing, especially when I first got into wargaming. It was a lot to wrap your mind around. And at first, I was sitting there thinking, huge games, all the counters, I want thousands. And after you try that a couple times, you're like, yeah, that's fun and all, but sometimes you want to play. Sometimes you want to play a game that's kind of bigger scale like that, but you don't want to spend a week setting the damn game up because you're burnt out by the time you get it to the table. Unconditional Surrender, you can get to the table in an afternoon relatively easy. It'll take you under an hour to set up a campaign, right? It is nowhere near difficult to get this one to the board, but it covers all those different aspects. It's got weather, it's got logistics, it's got troop points, your logistic points that you use to buy units. I forget what they call them specifically in this game. So you can recruit, you can do all of that, but it's not going to take you ages and ages and ages. All right. So if you set up something like Absolute Victory, good game. I like that game. It's not for everybody, but teach their own. That one is hugely counter dense. It took me days to set that game up. I think I spent 3 afternoons going over and getting all their counters right because there were so many different minor nations to worry about, so many counters spread across the entirety of the world, which is fun. But like I said, you don't always want that. Sometimes you want to be able to set up a game that covers the World War II European theater without having to invest a month in your firstborn to get it to the damn table. This one does provide you with that ability. And the rules are relatively streamlined, so it's not overly difficult. I did have some more issues, I think, with the sea aspect of this, but that's something I think a lot of games have trouble dealing with when it comes to troop movements and sea conflict and the whole line. That's one of the aspects that gets kind of tedious in a lot of different games. So I'm not going to hold that too much against this one. But it also had the ability to have what ifs, right? What if this happened instead? What if this minor nation hadn't gone to the Axis? What if it had gone to the Allies? It gives that ability to have things not go in historical accuracy, which I really like. Some people don't like that. Some people want, straight up, this is what happened in history, and I want to repeat that on my table. Me, I want to see what could have happened. What happens if, X country decides, no, I want to join them, and I want this to go on, whatever. I ended up kind of house ruling on this game, I think. A lot of them have it to where minor nations, they can't move their units into other countries, and I'm like, no, I don't want that. I want to be able to make all those choices myself. If I want to move a minor nation's units, if I want Spain to invade Great Britain, damn it, I want to be able to do that. I want to make my own choices, So yeah, this game does give you the ability to do that. Now, it's got more restrictions. Like I said, you can't technically do that, but it's your damn game. Play it however the hell you want, They did improve the components as well. They did release mounted maps for the game, which is excellent. I always prefer mounted over paper if I can get it, because it's a hell of a lot less shine on the camera. But yeah, Unconditional Surrender. This is one that I would love to see them expand. I would love to see an Unconditional Surrender in the Pacific. Maybe an Unconditional Surrender, world setting instead of just Europe. Unconditional Surrender, World War II. Have the whole series of the war covered, something like that, because I really think the game system is that good. It's not hard to learn. It does give you the deep complexity that you like, and especially the fact that it is not horribly counter dense. You can get it to the table in an afternoon. It'll take you a while to play it, don't get me wrong. This will take a long time if you play through, especially if you play through the whole campaign. If you play through the whole campaign, it's not coming off your table for a while. But the ability to get it to the table, to understand what everything means, the ease of being able to add aircraft to it, the support that they provide. The aircraft effectively just become like fatigued in this when they provide support, and then you can spend points to bring them back in, or bring them back up to snuff, but you can't just keep buying that. There are restrictions on it. You can pay to replace units. It's really just good across the board on everything, that the rules flow so you can play a large scale game. It's hard. I'm trying to describe it in a way that makes sense. It's a large scale game that plays like a small scale game. All right, if that kind of makes sense, because you don't have a buttload, thousands of counters. I know I keep saying this. You don't have the thousands of counters across the table. You have a much smaller amount, but it feels so much more grand than the counter density would normally allow. Anyway, it's excellent. It looks good. It still stands the test of time. Obviously, it's only a few years old anyway. Definitely recommend this one if you have not tried it. If you like those bigger World War II games, absolutely this one is one to give a shot to. All right, so last on our list, but certainly not least, is going to be Enemy Action Ardennes. All right, and this one is made by the legend, the man himself, Mr. John Butterfield. Love his style of games. I've always liked him, and this one is definitely my top favorite out of all that I've played so far. It's just an excellent game. So obviously, World War II game. Most of them are. There are just so many. This one is set in the Battle of the Bulge with the push into the Ardennes Forest. And this game has essentially 3 games in one. It is 2 solitaire games. One where you play as the Germans, one where you play as the Allies, and then a competitive version of this game. So effectively, you do get a lot of game in the box. Now, one of the big complaints about the game is it does cost a fair amount for what you get in the box. But I can kind of forgive it for that, because this was more early Compass. They had some different people producing their games at the time, and they've made a few different changes. The counters were a little bit thinner. Honestly, I like these little white core counters. I've always liked them. I know it takes tweezers to pick them up, but me personally, I like them. Some people didn't. I do. Now, the cards were a little thinner than I would have preferred, so I can understand some people knocking it for that. But the amount of game you get in the box is absolutely 100% worth the cost of the game. Even if you play just the solitaire aspects of it and you don't even do the competitive, that's still 2 games in a box, right? Flat out, you're getting your money's worth when it comes to this game. So in short, you would use a deck of cards to control your actions, the enemy actions, and you would play the cards in a certain way to cause your units to activate your formations. And you can see how the units are color coordinated to correlate with the cards that you're playing. So some units are part of a smaller group that coordinate with a bigger group. You know how military structures work. So it gives you that choice, right? That freedom when you're playing the game to kind of make your own choices. Are you going to make the right choice to succeed with your units or not? And the big thing for this game, I'm going to go ahead and address it, is the way combat works. It is not dice based, it's chit draw based. And it's way too complex for me to try to explain in this video. But depending on the choices you make, depending on the units that you contribute to the battle, and how much of a different factor you have, like how your combat odds, whether you have air support, whether you have artillery, whether you have motorized, mechanized units, all of that comes into play. And I think that gives an advantage that dice just don't. There's only so many modifiers. Now, some people disagree with me on this. Some people prefer modifiers over the chit draw, but I love the friggin' chit draw on this. There's only so many modifiers you can give with a dice, right? It doesn't matter what it is, a D6, a D12, a D10, if you're rolling 2 of them, 4 of them, 10 of them, whatever, you're always going to be down to a combat results table and applying modifiers to it to see what your result is. With this, it involves drawing those chits, and depending on the choices you made for that combat are going to affect whether that chit is going to benefit the attacker or benefit the defender. And there's a minimum amount of chits to be drawn and a max that you can draw. Again, it all depends on so many factors. This game is way complex, especially when it comes to that. There's a lot of rules. It is very, very, very deep to account for all of these little conditions. But it gives that specificity, if I'm saying that right, to combat that you just don't get with dice. You're just not going to get it on a combat results table. In this, right, with the chit draw, even if you take and you do combat just right, the odds are in your favor. You know, may the odds be ever in your favor. Even if you've got them, right? You've got the odds. You've got air support. You've got artillery. You've got mixed units. You've got armor support. Even if you do everything right, the chit draw might still go badly. Now, I understand a dice roll can go poorly too, but on a lot of those combat results table, the worst that you might get would be just a neutral, right? This, it can still go badly. You can still lose. It accounts for that fact that in combat, anything can happen. But if you make right decisions, if you do things that mitigate the odds in your favor, you're much more likely to come out on top, but there's no guarantee that you will come out on top. So when you're sitting there and you'll have your cup, your chit cup, and you just start drawing them out, and you have to kind of organize them. I'd always lay them down in a line and kind of slide them one way or the other, depending on if they were benefiting or hurting me. And you're looking at it and like, oh, I'm doing okay so far. You know, there are a few factors in my favor, but I've got 3 more chits I've got to draw. Did I make the right decisions? Did I give enough units into this attack? Did I, all that gets applied into this. Excellent, excellent system. Similar, but different from the D-Day series, how they don't operate off of dice, another Battlefield type game. That's what you're seeing here. And sometimes you want something that's different. We can't have all our games playing with dice. That's why I love seeing people do things that are different like this, where they account for so many different factors. The chit draw is basically I think there were 60 some chits that can potentially be drawn. So it's like a 60-sided die, right? You can't have that in any other thing. No matter how many other modifiers that you have, whether you're using the D6, D12, whatever, you're only going to have so many combinations. Even if you do 2D6, 2D12, whatever. You get overly complex, and the modifiers for me start becoming just chrome that wears me down, because I have to think, well, I've got a +1 here, -1 here, +2 here, and I'm like, I don't want to do all this damn math. For this, the chits kind of do that for you. So yes, it is very complex. It is a very difficult game to learn. I'm not going to lie. But there are some factors on it that I think do play a little bit easier. So yeah, addressing the difficulty of it though, I do have to say, yes, the game is very complex. If you are not into complex war games, this is an absolute pass for you. If you do like those deep games, though, if you want that unique solitaire experience that you're just not going to get in other types of games, that one where you really have to dig into it to get the most out of the game, enemy action Ardennes is absolutely a must get. There's just so much going for this game, and it's long. You can play a short scenario, or you can play the whole Battle of the Bulge. You can push through the whole thing. It's really up to you on how hard you want to go with it. I think this one is very much worth it, even at the price point. The amount of game you get in the box is just unparalleled. Plus, to add to that, they are finally, I know they've been bugged for this for a while, coming out with another enemy action. It's going to be enemy action Kharkov, and I am crossing my damn fingers I can get that one soon. I have been bugging John and Bill over at Compass Games to get that one out to us sooner rather than later. I know it's still going to be a little while, probably before that hits my table, but I cannot wait to try a new enemy action game. But alright, that's going to be it for this top 5. I hope you guys did enjoy it. Like I said, this is my top 5. These are the ones that I enjoy. By all means, feel free to put your comments down below. I'm sure there's going to be some dissension in the ranks. Gimpy, why didn't you mention this one? And I like the... No, I don't like that game. You always talk about that. There's some that I like. There's some that I don't like. If this video gets good traction, I might take and do one on the opposite. So this was... top Hex Counter type war games. I might do a top non-Hex Encounter war games, right? So stuff that, yeah, anything else besides, Hex Encounters, which would obviously have to include U-Boat, since we all know that is Kev's favorite game. Won Game of the Year with the Charles Awards. So yeah, definitely have to have that one on the list, right? All right, but you guys put your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Y'all take care. I'll see you in the next one.